Hello and welcome back to Shulchan Aruch HaRav. We continue in Hilchos Netilas Yadaim Siman Kufnun test. We pick it up with Sif Yud Zayin. Avodim ha'akvum ba'kaisel. If you have like a receptacle that's been carved out of stone, like a sink. Shachak bo base kibble, and now you've carved out like a receptacle to hold water. V'tiken lehem barza, and now you put a spigot in there. Ein litel mehen liyadayim. You can't use this to wash. Since they're permanently affixed into the wall. They're the wall. The ein shem kli alein. It's not considered a vessel. Afapisha asur lehen base kibble, even though you've made a receptacle out of this area. Im chakak lehen base kibble techila. If you first carve out a receptacle, and then connect it to the wall, then you could wash right out of there. Because when it was not connected, it was called a kli. And so too, a container that was connected to the ground after it was already a kli, and then you affixed it to the ground somehow, that's also considered a kli. That's only when it has a spigot that you can wash by way of that spigot. That the water comes out of the thing, and every time you open it, it's pouring out. And that's considered you opening it, and it's considered your koyach that makes the water come out. As will be explained later on in this Siman. But if you put your hands in the container, and then slosh them around the water. That's not called netila. Shizu ain't netila. Elkein hatvala. That's considered just toiveling, right? Because the container is affixed to the ground. You cannot toivel in drawn water. The water is like drawn out into that container, and you're sticking your hands in there. That's not netila, and it's not good tevila either, because it's drawn water. If the container is not connected to the ground, then that would be considered washing. Even though the water is not coming onto your hands from a noisein, because whether or not you pour the water from the kli onto your hands, or whether you put your hands into the kli where the water is, that's when it's just a kli, that's called washing. Unlike when there's a pipe or some sort of a channel, a delivery system, that's not a vessel, because it does not have four walls, because it's open on the end. Therefore, that's why you have to put your hands close to the place where the water is flowing, so that the water is coming onto the person's hands from the pouring from a vessel. So to anyone who hold a kli outside with your hands, you have to make sure that the water is coming onto your hands from the koyach of you putting the water from the kli onto your hands. If you put your hands in the kli, then you don't have to have the koyach of noisin. You have to be the person putting it on. Rather, you have to make sure that there's enough water in the container for netila. She revias, which is a revias, a quarter of a leg. It does not have to be 40 saw like it would be for tevila, because this is called netila, and it's not called tevila. It's not called dunking. It's not immersing, it's washing. Then there are those that say some say, and this is how we paskin, that it's not considered washing unless the water comes from the koyach of the person pouring the water. Like we see by the Kahanim when they had to wash their hands and feet in the base of Mikdash. It says from it. They will wash from it, but not in it. Because in it is not considered washing from the power of the person putting the water. It's got to come from out. It's got to come out from the kli onto the person. That's reichitz. If you remove the spigot and the water flows out, that's you. That's considered you doing it. You're making the water come out by removing the spigot or removing the plug. If it's an emergency, you could rely on the first opinion that you don't have a kli, but you have water in a kli that you could dunk your hands in. It's not called tevila. It's netila, as long as these requirements are met. You can make a bracha. If afterwards though you do get an actual vessel that you can wash from, yita b'loy bracha, you should wash again without a bracha. Some say no, even afil b'shas harchak you can't do this. You can't even if it's an emergency, you cannot dunk your hands in and consider it washing when it's a kli. Because the real halach is like the second opinion. And one should be concerned for that opinion. You do not make a bracha if you immerse your hands into a vessel in this way where it's considered it's not tevila, but you're trying to wash, right? If you put your hands right inside the kli and you can rely on it b'diavad, but you can't make a bracha. And not only that, you can't even rely on it for washing. Really, you have to cover your hand with a mat, with some sort of a napkin or a towel, and then you can eat. So there are those that say if you have no water at all, you can wrap your hands in something and eat the bread because you're not touching it. That will explain later. Have a great day.